Backbone of a country's economy, the banking sector plays a significant role in the economic growth and development of the country. Banks in India are going to be the wealth creators in the time to come. In 2020 to 2022, bank assets across sectors have grown exponentially. Total assets across the banking sector have increased to $2.67 trillion in 2022 with an efficient
It's on. Yeah. Thank you, Rini, for your wonderful introductions and making sure that the summit shines like always. A very good afternoon to everyone who's here. I love the way everyone's so engrossed in listening to what's happening. It's an honor to be on stage now with Mr. Sanjiv Chadha. And sir, as I introduce you, I also want to say he's the chairman and the managing director, the CEO and the managing director of the Bank of Baroda. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Just a short while ago, I want to begin by saying what Piyush Goyal said. This is going to be golden years of India to come. When it comes to the banking sector, the finance minister has clearly stated that in a developed India 2047, there's going to be a lot of contribution of banking. Mr. Chadha, how do you look at it, and how can banks ensure India as a mission superpower is on agenda?
So thank you, Rhythm, and a very good afternoon to everybody. So I think we need to look at in the context of how India as a financial system works. There are different models in different parts of the world. US, for example, is an economy where the bond markets really are central to the financial system. India, much like Europe, is largely dependent upon banks in terms of financing. So banks do have a disproportionate contribution to make when it comes to the financial system in India. And also is in terms of how the history has played out. So banks today also pretty much do the work which the DFIs, the development financial institutions, used to do in the past. So they are not only providers of working capital, they also do a lot of project finance. Then because of the nationalization, banks are front and center in terms of financial inclusion. So you can almost say that every aspect of the Indian economy, whether it is industry, whether it is MSMEs, the export sector, and increasingly consumer finance, banks are front and center. In terms of where we are positioned now, I think we are at a very fortuitous time in India's history, in India's financial history. I think the banks have come out much stronger through COVID. If there was one sector which performed well during COVID and also is now poised to outperform, it is banks. Partly it is on account of the fact that the corporate credit cycle has improved and the challenges that we had over the last 7 or 8 years have dissipated, but a lot of other things, for instance, again, well capitalized, a lot of reforms which have happened. So I think the finance minister, I think, made a very important point that as we move again in terms of our next phase of development, the banks are well poised to play a very important role.
Absolutely. Therefore, I come to the Bank of Baroda. It's reported a whooping 79.3% in the year-of-year jump in the net profit in Q1. What role, Mr. Chadha, does the Bank of Baroda envision in this path to being a superpower?
So I'll again, I think this is a forum where we probably again need to talk more in terms of the financial system, maybe less about BOB, but I can illustrate again, I think a few points with the example of the bank. So as I mentioned earlier, I think the fact that development in India needs to be broad-based is very important. So of our 130 million customers, nearly 70 million are financial inclusion customers, Jan Dhan account holders. So we have a 6% market share in India, but our market share in terms of Jan Dhan accounts is 17%. I think this is something which is very important because if growth has to be sustainable, it needs to be broad-based. And through the creation of this enormous infrastructure of Jan Dhan accounts, I think we have done a signal service to the country. For instance, when we had COVID and the government wanted to make sure that you can transfer money to the people who needed it most, jobs had been lost, it was the banking system through our business correspondents and this Jan Dhan account network which were able to reach out to them. The second important part, I think, is the digitalization agenda, which is again fundamental for a number of reasons. So we had launched our Bob World app about 1 year back. Today we have got something like 22 million customers. We are a bank which is 117 years old, but 4 times as many customers use Bob World today, every day, as compared to those who come to our 8,200 branches. So I think this is something which is very fundamental, because if you were to look at the history of the last 100 years, every time you wanted to do more business, you said, okay, I need to now open so many more branches, hire so many people. But with digitalization, that linkage of a scalable model which rested upon scalable costs has been broken. It is now possible for us to expand our business while making sure that costs are under control. The third part, again, I think what we have been talking of even in the previous sessions, for instance, the automotive sessions, is the power of collaboration and partnerships. Today, all banks, I think, are looking at doing more and more partnerships to make sure that they can reach out the last mile, that you can work with partners who can do certain things better. So I think all of these trends are what has powered both BOB and the banking system to become a much more effective partner in Indians' progress.
Yes, and you spoke about digital marketing, digital payments, digitalization. The RBI in its payments vision for 2025 document has made the vision payments for everyone, everywhere, every time. How do you think this broad basing of digital payments is going to be a game changer for the banking sector and for India?
So I think we spoke about the fact that financial inclusion is something that was very fundamental. So I think you're absolutely right. If there's been one revolution which has touched the life of almost everybody, it is the payment revolution. And there, I think it's important that when we talk of technology, it is something which is appropriate to India. And the model that we pioneered through the UPI system is truly unique and which again has worked very well for India in terms of the cost per transaction, in terms of scalability. So I think now the time has come where what we have achieved in terms of the digital infrastructure, the Aadhaar system, the payment system, now we're talking in terms of the ONDC, and this is the time to now build upon those successes to make sure that this infrastructure is used optimally and can reach, and we can make sure that all Indians are part of this progress.
In fact, like you spoke about this, what is the future of fintech, Mr. Chadha, in India? Because like we're saying, 80% of Indians today have bank accounts, 60% have, can get the internet access. How do we make it 100%?
So I think when we talk of fintech, I think we can talk of fintechs and we can talk of fintech, right? One is, of course, companies, startups who are actually responsible for so much innovation. And it is, again, for the banks to make sure that they can partner with them, and each of the partners can bring their respective strengths. The fintechs are agile, they're innovative, they have the ability for last mile connect. The banks in turn have got capital, they are well regulated, they are also profitable and can make investments. So I think working with fintechs has to be part of the business model of each bank. But then we come to fintech without the S. And I think that's something which, as we have spoken earlier, is equally powering banks in terms of how they work. I spoke to you about Bob World, that is again financial technology at work in a bank. I talked to you about the Jan Dhan account network, Now we are servicing our Jan Dhan accounts through business correspondents who also work through handheld devices. That's also financial technology in action. So I think we have to make sure that we appreciate both aspects of the fintech revolution. Fintechs as a source of innovation, and financial technology which will make sure that when it comes to the financial sector, in particular banks, it touches everything in terms of making sure that costs come down, in terms of making sure that your risk management is better, in terms of making sure that your services to your customers are far better as compared to what they were.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sir, because of these very reasons, the international media today says that it's the bankers, the Indian bankers, that the world is looking at, amidst the fact that China and Russia's growth prospects have gone down, of course, because of the Ukraine war and COVID. Today, because of global uncertainty, we are seeing this rise. But how do we sustain this advantage?
So I think you are absolutely right. To my mind, the Indian financial system and Indian banks have been a standout success, possibly underappreciated. The most valuable Indian banks, if you look at in terms of price to book value, for instance, are from India. And Indian private banks who came in the last generation are very competitive, to the extent that foreign banks actually have found it very difficult to increase their market share. Public sector banks, I think, over the last few years, again, have made sure that in terms of technology, they are coming right up to speed, and we are seeing a re-rating when it comes to public sector banks also. So I think the best part is that we have a very broad-based ecosystem which encompasses private banks, public banks, who are able to contribute again in each in their own way to what is a very resilient and a very vibrant financial system. Actually, if you were to look at the World Competitiveness Report, India actually improved its ranking from, I think, 41 to 37 last year. But within that, if you look at the financial system, it is rated 21st. So the financial system is actually a source of great comparative advantage to us, and it is now for us to make sure that we leverage it for the progress of the country.
Yes. So when you talk about progress, we also want to know when it comes to senior citizens in rural areas. There is a great lot going on in India. You just spoke about it, digital payments, digitalization. How does the unorganized labor, the rural sectors, the senior citizens get improved accessibility to this?
So I think that's a very important point. While we talk of digitalization, the digital divide is also a factor of life which we must address. So first of all, the urban-rural divide. I think when we talk of digital, it must be something which is appropriate to the user. You cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach. So as I mentioned to you, when it comes to rural clientele, and more than 60-70% of our clientele is from rural semi-urban areas, the approach that we have used is of business correspondents who work pretty much in the village where your consumer is, to make sure that that banking services are accessible. 2 years back, the proportion of our network of branches to VCs was about 1:2, which means that for every one branch, we had 2 business correspondents. Today, it has gone up to 1:5. I think it's very important we appreciate that there is an appropriate technology solution for each of our customers. Similarly, you talked of the senior citizens, for instance. So Bob World, of course, as I told you, was launched about a year back. But then about a few months back, we had another version of Bob World called Bob World Gold, which is for senior citizens, where the interface is much easier and appropriate to that set of users. I think that really is the beauty of digital. It was very difficult to have physical infrastructure which was tailor-made to your clientele. You of course had branches which were specialized branches for SMEs, for instance. But I think when you are in the digital world, the possibility of tailoring a solution for each customer category is far easier, far more practical. And as we go along, I think we will be able to make sure that not only do you have a digital solution, but is also appropriate to your use.
Absolutely, that's wonderful, sir, because Bob will be helping, the digital Bob will be helping these people, all the sectors, the infrastructure will also help. I want to ask you, how is the fintech industry placed in terms of values, with valuation? Are foreign investors interested to put their money in India's banking sector?
So I think when it comes to valuations, again, I think you have drawn a distinction between fintechs and banks. I think when you look at fintechs, effectively what is the basis of valuation? It is that you should have a scalable technology, which is the biggest advantage of digital enterprise. It is that you actually are able to attract a very large number of customers. But then at the end of the day, it is also important that you have a business model which is viable in the medium and long term. And that's where again the differentiation happens. It is possible to do the first two if you have sufficient pools of capital. The third really is the test case, which really separates the people who actually make it big. When it comes to banks, I think some of these factors operate equally. So one is of course that you should have technology which is scalable. It is important that you have customer base. So the bank actually already have a large customer base. It's important that, as I mentioned, that you have a viable business model. So banks already have a business model which is viable. Now when you twin this customer base and a viable business model along with technology which is appropriate, which is scalable, I think it becomes a very powerful solution. And which is precisely why, as I mentioned to you, that certain Indian banks actually are the most valuable banks in the world. And we are seeing a re-rating of the entire Indian banking sector also.
Okay, my last question to you, Mr. Chadha. What kind of growth do you envisage for India? What do you project will be the growth?
So I think we are at an inflection point which is very powerful. Ultimately, everything is comparative, right? So when you rate companies, you say this is AAA, this is AA, this is A. Everything is comparative. So I think both in absolute terms, I think we are rebounding and rebounding powerfully. Equally in comparative terms, I think we are very well placed. I think in many ways, what is distinguishing different countries in the world today is how they saw and how they addressed the central challenge of the pandemic. The fact that India's response was very well calibrated, we did not go overboard, for instance in terms of cutting rates, means that the kind of disruption that now the world faces when you want to normalize interest rates or normalize liquidity, that's not the challenge India is facing. So I think we are very well placed for cyclical reasons, for structural reasons, and also what has been a very wise way to confront the challenge of COVID.
Absolutely. On that very positive note, Mr. Chadha, we thank you for being with us on the India Economic Summit, sharing your projections for the banking sector and India at large. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Rhythm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Rhythm and Mr. Chadha. In our next special address that we have, Mission Superpower, Value and Valuation, we put the spotlight on what investors look for in a company while investing. This address is crucial, ladies and gentlemen, at a time when the nation is witnessing a long-standing market valuation debate. So let's take a look at a short audiovisual.
The entry, growth and expansion of India's startup ecosystem has been unprecedented. Just this year, India became home to the third highest number of unicorns globally. Touted to overtake China in the unicorn race soon, but some questions loom. Is innovation taking a backseat with investments ruling the tide? Is overvaluation of startups a cautionary tale for investors? Is there any value in valuations? Joining us is a key game changer with investments in over 46 companies. A visionary bullish on India, churning out 250 unicorns by 2025. A man who has helped launch 10 different ventures, growth and public market funds. Today at the India Economic Summit 2022, we have Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai, co-founder and chairman, RN Capital Partners and Manipal Global Education, speaking on value and valuation.
Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai, co-founder and chairman, RN Capital Partners, is also known as the architect of Manipal for his contribution in developing the city. Mr. Pai has served as the chairman of SEBI and is now a board member of the NSE in India. He's emerged as one of India's angel investors as he helped start over 10 different funds in venture, growth and public markets. His investments include companies like Byju's, Council, Zoomcar, Licious, among many others. So I'd like to now invite Mr. Mohandas Pai to take the stage and share his valuable insights.
Arnab, thank you for inviting me. Everybody loves money. Everybody wants to be a billionaire. It's good to have a lot of money, and we should have ambitions to make obscene amount of money. So valuations become important. Valuation is what people pay you for buying your stock. Value creation is what you do to create a sustainable business.